I was invited here tonight to speak about the theme, how do the arts play a big part in our lives? Now, if we were to put this prompt in the context of youth and education, I think, unfortunately, the arts play a rather insignificant role in our lives. This position has been informed by my 10 years of teaching experience. And it's a position that's not new, it's not unique. In fact, Ken Robinson has been delivering some of the most viewed TED Talks on this very subject. Back in 2006, he delivered his first talk on the subject titled, "Do Schools Kill Creativity?" To date, this is the most viewed TED Talk in TED history. Now, during this talk, Robinson discussed the need to reprioritize the arts within education, a restructuring within the current model. Just a few years after he would give this talk, he would escalate the rhetoric and urge a much more detailed prescription. He titled that talk, "Bring On the Learning Revolution." At this point, Robinson was now critical of mere reforms of the current system. Quote, "Reform is of no use anymore. That's simply improving a broken model." At this point, he made the call, we need a revolution in education. Although I am sympathetic to a lot of what Mr. Robinson says in his talks, and I am certainly sympathetic to his call of revolutionizing public education, in the end, I think Mr. Robinson has underestimated the counter-revolutionary forces by those who profit off this very broken system. The great counter-revolutionary movement, which began in the 1980s, started to see the conservative motto, "There is no alternative." This quote comes from then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and was repeated often through her tenure. And let's not forget that Thatcher cut her political teeth as Education Secretary. Even by the 1990s, you saw liberals with their own motto with a similar sentiment. You had Francis Fukuyama by 1990 declaring the end of history. According to Fukuyama, we have reached, quote, "the end point of mankind's ideological evolution." And since then, we've had entire generations raised on the notion that we have reached the pinnacle of our systems, of our models. And at best, we can hope for some sort of incremental changes in order just to fine-tune those very models. And this is where music, as a true art form, comes into play. Music has the unique capacity to not only inspire one's imagination in order to think an alternative, but it can serve as a way to motivate the will once you organize around that alternative. As the South African musician Miriam Makeba put it years ago, in our struggle, songs are not simply entertainment for us. They are the way that we communicate. And I'd like to share with you my experience in using music in this tradition in my own classroom. That is, using music in my classroom not as a form to entertain my students, but as a way to communicate to them that there is an alternative. Back in 2015, I, with a small group of educators, were teaching an ethnic studies course in an American public school. Now, ethnic studies is simply the critical study of ethnicity with a focus on the experiences and perspectives of people of color within and beyond the United States. Now, at the time, the program was truly unique. It was the only school district in the United States that offered such courses. So when I and with a group of other educators got together to set the curriculum for the course, we decided to put music at the center. Now, the student body that we were serving at the time was 92% minority. That is more than 9 out of 10 students walking our halls were considered non-white. It was a low-achieving school by all accounts. Once the ethnic studies program was implemented, the increase in performance was staggering. By every performance indicator that any school would use as a unit of measure of academic achievement, students that were enrolled in these courses saw mass improvements, not only in attendance rates, but graduation rates, GPA. Even standardized assessments, including math, increased by merely taking one course. The problem behind this is that the state of Arizona, 5 years prior, passed legislation effectively banning the teaching of ethnic studies in the state. Now, the legislation banning ethnic studies, which in effect made it illegal to critically teach the experiences of people of color, both within and beyond the United States, was immediately condemned by international right experts, citing multiple international treaties, charters, declarations, including the 1948 United Nations Human Declaration of Human Rights. Now, this put the school in a serious predicament. Either comply with the law, which would result in the elimination of a very successful program that served all students, especially poor students of color, incredibly well, or face the state withholding $14 million of funds on an annual basis as a result of teaching in violation of the law. Unfortunately, the school district decided at the time that they would pursue a policy of appeasement. And they decided to remove the music as it was being used in the classroom and replace it with a more traditional textbook. Now, for my part, the state went after my use of lyrics from the group Rage Against the Machine. They deemed it was dangerous and in violation of the ethnic studies ban. Now, at the time when I was interviewed by Rolling Stone magazine, I claimed that this was symptomatic, this banning of music, the censoring of materials, the banning of books, was symptomatic of a rise of ultranationalism that was going global. Just 2 years ago, in 2017, a federal judge in the United States ruled the ban unconstitutional, effectively overturning it. In large part, the federal judge found that the legislators that were responsible for drafting the ban on ethnic studies were motivated by racism. Now, I love what I do as an educator, but even the most dedicated educators at times begin to doubt the effectiveness of their strategies in the classroom. And as an educator like myself, it is rare to get such a concrete affirmation of the work you do in the classroom when a group of racist lawmakers deem your teaching dangerous. And I am sincerely grateful to those lawmakers for motivating me to continue. Now, these legislators had good reason to fear this music. Every movement that has ever changed the world for a better place has had its own soundtrack. Historically, if you go back to the abolition movement in the Americas, which sought to end slavery, had its freedom songs. The radical student movements, the 1960s and 1970s, all across the globe, had their freedom songs. The anti-apartheid movement in Africa had their own freedom songs. Like I said at the time, I warned that this was a broader symptom of an ultra-nationalist movement. Our failure, and I'm speaking to the adults, our failure to create an alternative education system, to reimagine it in a radical and revolutionary way, has had consequences that extends well beyond the classroom. I think Walter Benjamin sums this up quite well. Every rise of fascism bears witness to a failed revolution. Our failed revolution in education, in part, is responsible for what you're seeing around the globe today. What gives me hope is that young people, once again, have grown impatient in our inability and our unwillingness to restructure the models in a way to serve all humanity. They have taken to the streets to protest against the rising dictatorial tides. Next week, students have called a strike in order to address the climate change crisis in a much more meaningful way due to the inaction of adults. To those who seek to resist that change, I will end with a quote from musician and activist Tom Morello. "Censor what you want in school. Music teaches outside the school and stokes fires you cannot put out." Thank you.